In the shadows of Fort Worth, behind the quiet charm of the Panther City, lies a history etched in blood and broken trust. These are the stories of lives stolen, boundaries collapsed, and the relentless reach of a law that refuses to let silence win. Case number 1 is that of Reginald Kimbrough. In 2017, the quiet security of North Texas was shattered by a predator who thrived in the gaps between city lines. Reginald Kimbrough was not a stranger to his victims. He was a man who used past connections to bypass their natural defenses, turning familiarity into a fatal trap. Molly Jane Lapp, a former university girlfriend, made the compassionate mistake of allowing Kimbrough into her Fort Worth apartment on a Sunday night. What followed was a night of unimaginable cruelty. Kimbrough raped and strangled Lapp, but it was his cold, calculated behavior after the murder that truly stunned investigators. He didn't just flee, he stayed to clean. He placed her body in the shower and used her own washing machine to cycle her bedding and his blood-soaked clothes. Detectives later used electricity meter readings to prove the machine was running in the dead of night, a digital confession of his attempt to wash away the evidence of his presence. But the most haunting aspect of Kimbrough's story is the fatal miscalculation of the justice system. While Fort Worth police were still processing the scene of Lapp's murder, the lack of an immediate warrant allowed Kimbrough to remain on the streets. Just 4 days later, he struck again. Megan Graham, a vibrant young woman, was hiking alone at the Arbor Hills Nature Preserve in Plano when Kimbrough crossed her path. He kidnapped her, took her life, and discarded her body in Lake Ray Hubbard. The investigation eventually exposed a terrifying pattern. Kimbrough had been a serial predator for years, with a trail of unprosecuted sexual assault allegations dating back to 2012. It was a failure of shared data that allowed him to escalate from a rapist to a killer. Ultimately, faced with the overwhelming weight of DNA evidence and digital tracking, Kimbrough pleaded guilty to capital murder. He traded the death penalty for a life behind bars, leaving 2 families to mourn daughters whose trust in the world was met with the ultimate betrayal. Case number 2 is that of Matthew Purdy Jr. On a September night in 2023, the unspoken line between a vibrant night out and a senseless tragedy was crossed in Fort Worth's West 7th District. Wes Smith, a 21-year-old TCU student with a future as bright as the city lights around him, was standing on a sidewalk when he was approached by Matthew Purdy Jr. Purdy was a man walking a dark path, already on probation for aggravated robbery, a second chance he was about to forfeit in the most violent way possible. The two were total strangers, their lives colliding in a moment of pure, unprovoked malice. Purdy asked Smith a single, cryptic question about his father before pulling a 9mm handgun. He fired twice, and, as Smith fell to the pavement, Purdy stood over him to deliver a final, execution-style shot to the head. There was no robbery, no previous grudge, and no heated argument, just the terrifying reality of random gun violence. Police caught Purdy minutes later, finding him hiding in a nearby parking lot with blood on his backpack and the weapon still in his possession. In a final, desperate act of guilt, he tried to dismantle the gun inside the patrol car and tossed the pieces out the window. His eventual confession was as chilling as the act itself. He admitted he kept shooting simply to make sure the young student was dead. In 2025, he was sentenced to 60 years for murder, but the hole he left in the TCU community remains a permanent scar. Case number 3 is that of Kenneth Granville. In the mid-1970s, Fort Worth faced a wave of killings so disturbing that they redefined the city's understanding of evil. Kenneth Granville was a man whose internal world had long been collapsing. A Vietnam veteran who had been dishonorably discharged, he returned home to live a quiet, withdrawn life that masked a growing instability. In October 1974, Granville's path led him to the Riverside Village apartments, where his girlfriend's relatives lived. Inside were 3 young women, Laura and Linda McClendon and their cousin Martha, along with 2 innocent toddlers, Stephen and Natasha. In a horrific display of shattered trust, Granville forced the family to tie each other up with telephone cords before unleashing a spree of violence. He raped Laura and, When a child began to cry, he responded with a knife. By the time he fled, 5 people lay dead, including the 2 helpless children. For months, the case went cold, and Granville even had the audacity to discuss the murders with others as if he were a mere bystander to the tragedy. It wasn't until February 1975, after a second explosion of violence against Vera Hill and Betty Williams, that Granville sought out a pastor and surrendered. He placed his weapons on a police station table and calmly detailed 7 murders, matching every forensic detail investigators had struggled to explain. After decades of appeals, the state of Texas executed Granville in 1996, closing one of the darkest chapters in the city's history. Case number 4 is that of Solomon Giadbo and Samuel Giadbo. The bond between twins is usually seen as an unbreakable source of support, but for Solomon and Samuel Giadbo, it became a partnership in blood. Their story is a chilling example of how a single moment of humiliation can fester into a fatal obsession. In 2021, the brothers were robbed at gunpoint and forced to strip naked while being filmed, a video that was later used to mock them. For the Giadbo twins, this was an unspoken line they could not let stand. In November 2025, that long-simmering resentment boiled over into a coordinated killing spree. They first targeted 19-year-old Devin Randles, gunning him down in a North Fort Worth parking lot. 2 weeks later, they executed their primary target, Isaiah Gonzalez, the man they believed was responsible for their 2021 degradation. They waited in the shadows for over 30 minutes before opening fire as he entered his car. The brothers operated as a single unit, their mother's white Nissan Altima serving as their chariot of revenge. Even after Samuel was briefly detained following a high-speed chase, the lack of immediate evidence saw him released back to his brother's side. It was only when detectives turned to modern technology, matching their Nike Air Force Ones and using facial recognition on the very video that started the feud, that the puzzle pieces locked together. Today, the twins sit in the Tarrant County Jail together, facing the consequences of a revenge plot that traded 2 lives for their pride. Case number 5 is that of Maurice Kelso Smith. In June 2020, Darion Burley was preparing for the joy of motherhood, having just celebrated a gender reveal for the twin boys she was carrying. She couldn't have known that the man she shared that joy with, Maurice Kelso Smith, was spiraling into a haze of drug addiction and domestic control. Smith was a man who felt the walls closing in. Just a day before the tragedy, he had failed a background check for a firearm, only to have an acquaintance illegally buy the gun for him hours later. The argument that ended it all happened in the front seat of a car after a morning breakfast. In a sudden burst of rage, Smith fired a single shot into the back of Darion's head, killing her and his unborn sons instantly. His actions afterward showed a total collapse of empathy. He drove for miles with her body in the passenger seat before abandoning the car and the sonogram of his twins in a Mansfield neighborhood. When police found him, he was trying to wipe the blood from a stolen carjacked vehicle, pretending to be disoriented to stall the investigation. But the forensics told a story of cold premeditation. In 2024, a jury saw through the act, convicting him of capital murder. Smith was spared the death penalty, but was handed a life sentence, ensuring he would spend every remaining day of his life reflecting on the family he chose to destroy. Case number 6 is that of Timothy Kean Huff. Sometimes, the weight of a crime falls not just on the person who pulls the trigger, but on everyone who helped load the gun. Timothy Kean Huff was a career criminal and a key member of the Cantina Bandits, a robbery crew that terrorized Latino bars across Fort Worth in 2018. Along with his partners Dosian Steto and Samuel Mayfield, Huff operated with a reckless disregard for the lives of those they robbed. The night that changed everything was September 13th. As the crew exited a sports bar they had just terrorized, undercover officers moved in. In the chaos that followed, Huff fled into the night while his partner, Steto, ducked into a dark driveway. It was there that Steto turned and fired the fatal shot that took the life of Officer Garrett Hull, a veteran who had been leading the charge against the bandits. While Huff was not the one who fired the weapon, the Texas law of parties created a path for ultimate accountability. Prosecutors argued that by participating in a violent felony where gunplay was a known risk, Huff was legally responsible for the blood on the ground. Despite his desperate attempts to delay justice, even swallowing razor blades in his jail cell, a jury convicted him of capital murder in 2022. He was sentenced to life without parole, a verdict that served as a grim reminder that in the eyes of the law, the accomplice is often the equal of the killer. Case number 7 is that of Christopher Reddick Jr. and Brandon Williams. Fireworks were supposed to be the only thing lighting up the sky over the Como neighborhood in July 2023, but a sudden explosion of human anger turned a celebration into a massacre. Christopher Reddick Jr. and Brandon Williams were young men who brought a lethal edge to an unsanctioned afterparty following the annual Como Fest. When an argument broke out between Williams and a rival, the situation dissolved into a fatal miscalculation. Williams drew his handgun and opened fire, while Reddick admitted to firing what he called warning shots into the air. But in a dense crowd of hundreds, there is no such thing as a safe shot. Their bullets tore through the celebration, hitting bystanders who had nothing to do with their petty grievance. Paul Willis, Cynthia Santos, and Gabrielle Navarrete, all young adults with their whole lives ahead of them, were killed in the crossfire. The community was left shattered, and the case drew national attention as a symbol of the devastation that occurs when firearms mix with impulsive fear. Detectives used a mountain of surveillance footage to track the two men down just 4 days later. Both men now wait behind bars, their claims of self-defense and warning shots ringing hollow against the reality of 3 funerals in a neighborhood that will never celebrate the 4th of July the same way again. Number 8 is that of Christopher Mike. The final story is a haunting look at how digital tools can be twisted into instruments of domestic terror. Christopher Mike was a man who refused to accept the boundary of a breakup. After being asked to move out by his pregnant ex-girlfriend, Sylvia Scott, Mike's behavior shifted from erratic to predatory. He didn't just walk away. He used an iPad to track Sylvia's movements, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. In November 2025, Mike broke into Sylvia's home and waited in the shadows for hours. When Sylvia returned home with her mother, Alora Stewart, and her 3 children, the trap was sprung. As they entered the garage, Mike stepped out and fired, striking Sylvia in the face and neck. He then turned the gun on her mother, Alora, shooting her before fleeing deeper into the house. The scene was one of pure horror, children screaming as their mother and grandmother lay bleeding. Miraculously, Sylvia, her unborn child, and Alora all survived the physical wounds, but the psychological trauma remains an unspoken line they must walk every day. Mike was quickly apprehended and charged with multiple felonies, including kidnapping and aggravated assault. His case serves as a chilling reminder that premeditated violence often unfolds in the most familiar places when the obsession for control outweighs the value of human life.